So what is the art operation? Well, it's what I've been doing for 30 years. I make paintings, which I work in series. I'll have a project, which the project is for all three modes of expression: images, sounds, and text, writing. So I'll make a series of paintings for a project, like the history project. We'll say I started to try to paint the concept of history, or the concepts of history. So I started making a series of paintings, and I would do one after the other. I made hundreds of paintings and drawings for the project. I made sounds. I made albums of songs with the guitar and voice, and a concept album, if you will. And I wrote a lot. So I wrote a lot of poetry. I wrote novels, and I wrote philosophy mostly. In the humanities, the research that I do as a philosopher, will say. In the novel, I invented what I call the novelistic phenomenology, which is a kind of writing where I'm writing about the novel as it appears in the author's mind, in my mind. Not always. I write stories with characters, but the characters, I try to make them purely fictional, although they were based loosely on aspects of myself and people that I knew. But I tried to create real characters, like I assume Dostoevsky did in his novels. They weren't necessarily autobiographical. It was fiction. And novelistic phenomenology is that it's this phenomenology of the novel. So while I'm writing, I have metafiction, where it's the author that inserts himself into the story and starts to write about the novel, about the characters, and the characters go through they're like in political exile within the novel, and then they try to transcend their state of exile, and they they eventually put the author on trial for his lack of imagination, and also, so all sorts of things happen in a sort of metafictional method of writing. And the series of paintings, like I've always worked in series and sub-series, and on a project, which the project is a conceptual system, a complex conceptual system that underlies it. And the series of paintings, I mean, phenomenologically speaking, my experience of the universe, of the world, is I have a very deep, we'll say, inward experience of inwardness, where I'm speaking now externally, throwing words out into the world. Those are actions, but what happens really when I'm concentrated and experiencing what I think is a fundamental direct experience of first witness testimony of history and the world and reality is concretely real to me. It's this inward experience of things moving in this deep space, almost bottomless, it seems, these depths. And from within, these ideas come, and they're sort of projected onto in my gut and my abdomen, where the history project, for instance, had a lot to do with the seigneurial system of land distribution and the baron sort of character, which would really be a lord, a seigneurial lord, but I call him the baron of the barony of Saint Hilaire or whatever. And those images, those stories are projected on this inward space. Before the history projects, I worked on the exhibition Tonal Cinema, and it was a system of 16 novels, or one novel and 15 novellas, short novels. And that was a whole idea of the cinema, the tonal cinema, which had a projectionist in the projectionist booth, projectionist, and then he was working on splicing films and whatever, putting films together that he was projecting. And then you had Vapors and Abysms, which was a series of 3 novellas, which was the dark space of the theater where people are seated, and the projector projects the image onto the screen, and you have the screen of the reel, whatever. And then there's vapors sort of emanating because people are smoking, whatever, so there's smoke and the light, and the smoke makes the Vapors and Abysms image. I also had so I had all these novels in it. It was the idea of this tonal cinema, and the tonal cinema was also a style of poetry where I wrote short lines of abstract poetry, which was kind of surrealistic, and it made like a strip of film as you read it, and you had to imagine the sound of the words as an audio track, and the images as they developed through the poem as a visual track. So it was like a film, like an actual cinema, and it was tonal because it was poetic. It was sounds of poetry. but I was never really understood. People said it was incoherent and whatnot. That doesn't matter. Then I had the history project, so I'm working in large-scale projects that last many years. The history project lasted from 2001 to 2004 mostly. It's an ongoing, open-ended project, so I can keep adding what I call history paintings, which I have one there, but I can't go get it right now. It was I invented a kind of painting which I thought was kind of like the history painting in history, but I imagined how would I reinvent the history painting in the 21st century. So I came up with this abstract style of painting. And then, so really what I want to say about the series of paintings is that, to me, experience, I feel a book, I hold a pencil or a pen, I see my boots on the ground. It's a series of paintings, really. I'll see a hand coming towards me right now, and then I turn, and with every change of perspective, there's a new image, and then a sensation, the perceptions, there's thoughts, and there's feelings, and everything's in constant movement, so it's always continually in movement. And on the interior space, it's happening sometimes very fast, and the characters pop up, and I mean, it's not a mental illness. I'm a creator. That's what the art operation is. I'm creating, and I started also making digital visual images where I call noise fields, and I have the noise field theory and signal science that underlies those productions. And really, the art operation is just a studio that's interdisciplinary, that does art and research, and it's called an art operation because it's an operation. It's a business operation. Like, there's an operational aspect to it, and it's strategic too, because I'm responding to events in the world, and I'm creating cultural artifacts that I think put into value the cultural values of a people or a nation, or globally, what I call the historiosphere. It's the sphere of history happening simultaneously or pseudo-simultaneously across the globe, all at the same time. There's a sort of, I would call it, conscientization process where people take awareness of certain things, and it's happening all globally, all at once, everyone in their own individuality, because I believe that only really the individual exists in his or her fundamental experience of the phenomena, the observations of reality. And the historiosphere, it's all happening all at once across the globe. And history, I mean, I won't get into what history is, but in my history project I study art history, art historiography, the philosophy of art, and other things, but really the research it informs the art operation, the production of the cultural artifacts. And why do I do this? I mean, it's a need. I feel the need to construct these things, these constructions, what I once called construction land. And I just want to say that in my novelistic phenomenologies, there's always worlds. Like in the history project, you had crackland, the land of fissures, and it's not crack as in the substance. It's a land with floating land masses or land fragments, and it's like sort of like in outer space with like an asteroid belt or something. And then there was Saint Elsewhere, which was where I always said Montreal is an elsewhere, where because it was originally from part of the French colony. Before that, it was First Nations, but I mean, it ended up being a city in the French colony, and it was overtaken, as was that part of Canada at the time, by the English. So it's like it became an elsewhere. It was patrialized, I say, like it lost its homeland, and it lost it's like someone that was in exile in his own home, or in his own homeland. So Montreal became an elsewhere. It was sort of like folded over into this other place, where it became other than itself. That was Saint Elsewhere. And then there was the Dream Assembly, which was an assembly sort of like a national assembly where people are arguing and passing laws and everything, and they through this sort of process of adversarial review, where they debate and stuff, and that would be happening in such Dream Assembly. So they was passing laws and everything so that it would pass the content that would be